This is John Howell Essential Cuts, your daily rundown of the best from today's show on 890 WLS.
Following the top local stories of the afternoon, obviously here on WLS. Reading from Bob McCoppin's piece, which I see at the Chicago Tribune. In a move that could affect Northwestern University's plans to renovate its football stadium, the city of Evanston, for some reason, has now asked a judge to remove some property, NU property, from consideration by a special committee that debates disputes over the school's land use in Evanston. And some Evanston residents, like this woman, concerned.
We just feel that it's totally inappropriate to start having private affairs here, to have concerts that will have no place in a residential area. The noise will be incredible.
They're talking about not a football stadium, right? They want to do a commercial entertainment complex. That is gridlock in the area, makes it difficult for ambulances.
And that man, too, a resident of Evanston. So the committee members, residents, said they were shocked by the city's lawyer making such a proposal, which is against their wishes, and without public notification, they plan to go to court to stop the action. So now let's welcome Bob McCoppin back to WLS for some details. Bob, why does NU want to limit debate?
Well, they say they're just trying to simplify and clarify a dispute over how this should be handled, basically. That's the short answer. Do you want the longer answer?
Well, this involves a parking lot next to existing Ryan Field. It would likely remain if the new stadium is ever built, but I think that the city, and I'm guessing that NU has prompted the city, they don't want to start discussing the parking lot and open that up to this committee because that would be a springboard to voice other concerns. Am I correct? Right. It's arising out of this parking lot. You know, Northwestern wants to build a new football stadium there on the same site as the current stadium in Evanston, but and that is not covered. The problem is that Northwestern sued the city of Evanston 20 some years ago, challenging their historic district, and they ended up settling with the city. And as part of the settlement, they had to create this committee of a couple of residents from Evanston with a couple of representatives from Northwestern. And they're supposed to hash out any land use issues between Northwestern and the residents, because Northwestern, of course, owns a bunch of property in Evanston. And, the residents are often affected by land use there, by traffic or noise or various student activities. So this committee is supposed to be a forum where they can talk out these issues. Who decides who sits on the committee? There's an Alderman Claire Kelly from Evanston, and two other residents and two representatives from the school. And who decides if the committee recommends something, whether it's implemented or not? Well, that's the thing. The committee has no power. So they can talk about things, but they have no power. But the alderman reports back then to the city council the concerns of the residents and whatever, the school is working on. So, so this, the proposed stadium, of course, is going to be hashed out thoroughly before the city's land use commission, and ultimately the city council. But this committee wants first crack at it. The residents want to be able to air their concerns because Northwestern wants to hold like 10 concerts now at the new stadium, rock concerts, music concerts. And so the residents are very opposed to that, having the traffic and noise from that in their neighborhood. The requested change, Bob, to eliminate the parking lot from open discussion with a committee, that's unusual because it comes not from the university, but from Evanston, the city of Evanston. Do you suppose that's at NU's request? Yes. Northwestern had raised this issue previously and said, hey, this committee is not the proper forum to be talking about the stadium because it's not under their purview. And so you would expect Northwestern to file a motion like this, but for some reason they didn't want to, and the city attorney did so instead. Again, saying that since the two sides were disagreeing about this, that he just wants a judge to clarify it.
And that happens tomorrow?
Yes, there's a hearing on it scheduled. There's a hearing in the case scheduled tomorrow.
So with all this recent scandal, the hazing scandal at NU, I assume that has put a bit of a wrinkle into their plans to just kind of ramrod this new stadium proposal through. But it's those 10 annual concerts that concern most of the neighbors, correct?
Right. And so people are, with the hazing scandal coming on and spreading to other, beyond football, to other programs, the opponents of the stadium are saying, hey, with the hazing scandal, they should just back off the stadium proposal for now and concentrate on fixing the hazing problem and then come back to the stadium later.
I think I've seen this movie before. First, when Wrigley wanted lights, that was in '88, a couple years earlier when they started that process, obviously. And then when Wrigley wanted to have all the concerts there. And I've seen this movie before. It doesn't normally go in the residents' direction.
Yeah, there are some parallels there. And right now, of course, Wrigley Field has concerts, regularly throughout the season. So, but again, Northwestern is sort of on the defensive because of this hate scandal.
Yeah. Bob, thanks so much for the update. We'll see what happens tomorrow and have you back on to discuss it down the line, okay?
All right. Sounds good, John.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
Driving the news today, crisis in Israel as lawmakers have approved a judicial overhaul. The White House responds that it's unfortunate. In Israel, lawmakers approved this key part of a judicial overhaul plan pushed by Benjamin Netanyahu. And part of the plan, these sweeping reforms, removes the court system's ability to strike down unreasonable decisions by the government. In other words, it neuters their judicial branch. Critics say it'll mark a move away from democratic ideals. Supporters say it'll claw back some power from unelected judges. Here is a statement from the Prime Minister through his interpreter.
Today, we performed a needed democratic step in order to bring back a balance between the branches, what we didn't have for 50 years.
So let's start there with Andy Field, who's watching us in D.C. for ABC News. Andy, thanks so much. So the bill passed unanimously. What's the problem?
Well, it passed unanimously because the opposition left the Knesset when they took the vote.
That seems like a strategic mistake.
Yes, well, I think they were walking out in protest here. Changes would give the Knesset final say over, Knesset, by the way, is their version of Congress, final say over judicial appointments and give it the power to overturn the Supreme Court decisions with a simple majority. Now, that's not much different than here in the United States. Congress can do some of that already with the three branches of power. Certainly, the Senate has power over judicial appointments to the Supreme Court here in the United States, so that would be similar to what we have there. Overturning the Supreme Court decisions with a simple majority in Israel's version of Congress would be different than here. You would need a supermajority to actually change laws in this country, so that is slightly different here.
Well, my understanding had to hold on a second, Andy. Let me just get this, and I don't mean to sandbag you here, but so those opposed to it just walked out of the chamber in a snit fit in protest. Had they stayed, they probably would have lost. But my understanding is would have a very, very slim victory for Netanyahu. Do we know how many would have been in opposition to this ballpark?
I don't have all the numbers in front of me here, but you're right. It is a very slim majority, and he has the prime minister job by a very slim majority. And here's the major difference between Israel and the United States. In order to become prime minister, basically the equivalent of our president here in the United States, you need to win the majority in the Knesset. And then they pick the prime minister, who is the leader of that party. So basically, if you are the Prime Minister of Israel, you and your party control the two branches of government, with only the Supreme Court being that check and balance there.
Not anymore.
Well, it's not a done deal yet. This is somewhat in stages. It's a little complex, but there are other elements of this that still have to be voted on. And Benjamin Netanyahu, watching the really just rabid outrage against what happened there today, is counting his votes and going, gee, this could put me out of power. And he's now being a little conciliatory, saying, look, we have offered compromises here. We're still willing to compromise. This isn't finalized until perhaps even November, and we are ready to talk with the opposition. So I think they're responding to this in a way that, like, wow, we didn't realize there'd be this much anger. And so they are now backpedaling just a little bit to see if there's some way to make a compromise.
So, Andy Field, can they appeal this to the courts one last time, or are they out of business as of today?
That's a good question. I did read that somewhere that some of this appeal could go to the courts, which, of course, is the court. Now, in our courts, we have to say it's either constitutional or unconstitutional. There, the level for judgment here is reasonable. Is it reasonable that this law was passed or not passed? So this court could indeed say, gee, this is unreasonable. And, of course, with a new law passing, all they need is a simple majority to overrule the Supreme Court. So it's a bit of a mess over in Israel right now.
Well, that leads to my next question. Are there protests going on? I know that there's a lot of opposition to this, but is it, how are things looking at this hour?
Well, at this hour, I think it's pretty much the middle of the night there. I don't know if they're still protesting, but they have been pretty much all day in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Jerusalem, in all the major metropolitan areas of Israel. There have been massive protests, work stoppages. There are some people in the Israeli military reserve who said, that's it, we're going to quit. And Benjamin Netanyahu reached out to all of the military, almost pleading with them, saying, look, we don't want to politicize the military here. Please understand that politics and military are two separate things. So there is a bit of chaos right now in Israel, and there's some great concern about the future of democracy there.
Andy Field, we're talking about the news driving the day. Crisis in Israel. Lawmakers have approved this judicial overhaul. How has our White House responded?
Well, they're basically saying it's unfortunate that they have let such a slim majority make such a giant decision about democracy there. And they're urging the Israeli government to reconsider. But at this point, that's pretty much all they can publicly say. It's very hard for the United States to basically stick its fingers into the political business of another country, except for the fact that we provide a whole lot of funding to Israel in terms of military aid and political funding.
Yeah, last time I saw the above board, on the record, Israeli aid annually is north of $14 billion.
Well, and it's something they need to remain a democracy there because of all the attacks they have on democracy, not just from within, but from without that country.
Yeah. Andy Field, thanks so much for the update. We'll watch the story develop, and I'm sure we'll be back on a little bit later on this week.
Thanks.
Take care.
This is John Howell Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
Reading from Rick Pearson's column in your Chicago Tribune. A group headed by a 2020 presidential election denier will get access to an unredacted list of all Illinois voters and their personal information, such as our mailing address, our email address, our telephone numbers, under a federal court settlement with the State Board of Elections. Now, to me, this seems to be a great breach and a big, big mistake. But, and now let's welcome Rick Pearson back to WLS, and thank you for taking time out from your next story on VP Harris's visit today to speak with us. Is it true, I think I'm correct here, reading your column, that political parties right now have access to the same information, so this is just expanding out the people who have our home addresses, our email addresses, and our phone numbers for their own purposes?
Yes, and in some respects, yes. I mean, the fact that political parties can pay this fee and have this information, I will say, they're more viewed like known quantities, and so now this information is going to be turned over to what is largely an unknown quantity.
So tell me. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
So this is one of the reasons that in return for providing this information as part of a federal court settlement, that there's a confidentiality agreement that the Illinois Conservative Union and its leaders cannot disseminate that information beyond the group.
Can they use it for fundraising or to send me a mailer?
No.
Well, then why do they want it?
One of its founders, who has headed various, and I want to put quote marks around this, election integrity efforts, has consistently maintained that, according to her belief, there are more registered voters than people living in certain election jurisdictions. Well, she's never proven it up.
Well, we know that, people become deceased and people move out of state, and from time to time we have to update our records, obviously. But we have 8.1 million registered voters here in the state. So this information, age, address, phone number, email address, counties, state voter ID numbers all go to this conservative union led by, and tell us more about Carol Davis.
So Carol Davis has been around for years. She came out of the Tea Party movement in the far west suburbs and Carroll Stream, St. Charles area. And for the last several years, she created this Illinois Conservative Union and has been focused on, as I said, election integrity, and her belief that voter rolls are routinely bloated, done so on purpose, and that every election has fraud. She's, as you start out our interview, she's a 2020 election denier. She believed that it was Antifa that was part of behind the January 6th insurrection. One of her close friends is a name that people who follow these Trump legal challenges that went nowhere to the election. One of her best friends is Cleta Mitchell. And Cleta was also on the phone when Trump was speaking to Georgia officials trying to find those 11,000 more votes.
What part does the group Judicial Watch play in this story?
Well, she had expressed frustration about getting these voter lists. And there are provisions in federal law for transparency in voting lists. And so Judicial Watch heard her attempts to challenge it, and they brought suit on her behalf. And what we had now was a settlement between basically Judicial Watch, the Illinois Conservative Union, and the State Board of Elections over the information that would be released, for how long it would be released, and what it could and could not be used for.
Was this a settlement, or was this ordered by a judge?
This was a settlement between the parties that was overseen by a judge. The judge acknowledged the settlement as well as the confidentiality agreement.
Does she get these records in perpetuity?
No, I believe through 2026. And after that point, they have to destroy all the records.
And how will we know if they destroy all the records?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, this thing is loaded with questions, okay? And again, what are they going to do with that information? And already I've had somebody tell me that this woman has, during the last Republican campaign, she did not like the Irvin Bourne Republican ticket, as she was a Bailey supporter. And so when someone called her cell phone to ask, left a message about volunteering for the Irvin Bourne ticket, she posted the phone number, the guy's phone number and name, and encouraged people to dox him.
Ugh. Okay. But that's not in the article. That's just what you heard from a reader.
That's just what I heard after the article came out.
Well, that may or may not be true. Let's be clear about that. We don't know.
Well, actually, I've got these screenshots that show that.
Okay. I should have known that you wouldn't say it on the radio unless you had some backup on that.
Right. No, I've got the screenshots and talked to the guy that it happened to.
So is this going to be a future article in the Tribune, I assume? Maybe.
I think it will be. Yes. Because a lot of people do have questions about, and you're right. The political parties already
have it. Yeah. So that seems reasonable. I mean, their political advocacy, agree or disagree with their views, but it's already out there. The Republicans have it. The Democrats have it.
Right.
Yeah.
But one other thing I should note too is there's no requirement that you have to, when you register to vote, that you have to fill in your phone number or your email address.
Right.
So, technically, not everybody did that. So those people who were smart enough not to do that won't be bothered that way.
Who monitors the conservative union? Who monitors the conservative union to make sure they don't disseminate it?
That's going to be up to the State Board of Elections and by word of mouth and everything else like that. There is no monitor. It's just going to be, the State Board of Elections doesn't know what they're going to do with the information.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe that this group doesn't know what it's going to do with the information.
Well, I've said it 1,000 times now. You may think you have a right to privacy, but have no expectation to it at this point.
Oh, absolutely. That's the absolute truth.
Final question, Rick Pearson of the Chicago Tribune, talking about Anthony Rizzo and his walk-up music. If you were a professional baseball player, what would you choose?
I knew you were going to come around to this. Oh,
what song? What song?
My Way.
Oh, it's a little slow, but it's impactful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have to jog up to the plate. I can take my
saunter.
Time.
You can take your time.
The clock doesn't start till I'm stepping the box.
And then if you strike out, they could play you off with regrets. I've had a few.
Yeah.
But then again, too few to mention. Oh, that's an excellent choice. Yeah. Maybe an up-tempo version of it.
I'm sure somebody's already covered it while we're speaking,
Thank you, Rick. I'll see you at our usual stool number 1 and stool number 2.
Excellent.
Okay.
Can't wait to see you.
All right, see you later.
You're listening to John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.
I found his column, this time at shawlocal.com, shawlocal.com. They're always worth reading. We go to our retired chief of Riverside, Tom Weitzel, for all things law enforcement, to talk to somebody whose boots have been in the sand, so to speak. Welcome back, Chief. How are you, sir?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
Let me read the first paragraph of your piece. Some of you who read this column may find it strange that I, as a former police chief and a career law enforcement officer, would be writing about what to expect when you're stopped for a DUI or a suspected DUI. But if we want a just, compassionate, and legal criminal justice system for all, you should know your rights and what police can and cannot do. Let's start with what the police will ask you and what you must do. Chief, when we're pulled over, what do we have to comply with on a suspected DUI stop?
Well, they treat it like a regular traffic stop to begin with, so you have to comply with when they ask for driver's license or insurance. You have to comply with that. Typically, officers will ask certain questions if they suspect you of a DUI, where you're going, where your house is, what direction you're traveling. You don't have to answer those by law, but most people do, and those are really good indications because if you live on it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you live on the north side of Chicago, and you're headed towards Midway Airport, and you tell the officer, I'm on my way home, that's a pretty good indication you don't have any idea where you're going.
And everything's on camera now. Everything's recorded, correct?
Yeah, they have, most of the departments have both body cameras and squad car cameras, so you're being filmed twice from different angles. Yes, everything's on film.
In Illinois, do we have to participate in the standard field sobriety testing?
You do not. There's actually 2 types. There's what they call field testing. It's called a portable breath test, a PBT. Almost all officers carry those. You do not have to blow into that. But if you do, they'll ask you to blow into a breathalyzer inside a police facility. The breathalyzer is the one that's used in court. The portable breath test is used for probable cause. If you do not blow, you can lose your driver's license for anywhere from 6 to 12 months without, in most cases. However, good DUI defense attorneys will always have what's called a summary suspension hearing. So they'll get their client in front of a judge within a month of the DUI arrest and ask the judge to stay that order until there's a disposition in the case, meaning guilty or not guilty.
Do I have to submit to a blood or urine test?
You do not have to do that unless you're involved in a fatal crash or a great bodily harm crash. And that's kind of the standard. So the law is written, if you're involved in a fatal accident or a great bodily harm, that definition means someone's likely to die or lose a limb. Police can force you to take blood and urine, and they can transport you to an emergency room and have emergency personnel draw your blood against your will.
Do I have to allow the initial police to search my vehicle before it's impounded?
Only if you're arrested. So if the officer walks up and asks for your driver's license, they get out, you're doing the field sobriety test, and he asks you, can I search your car? And you say yes, then he can. If you say no, he can't unless he physically arrests you, and then he can only search the driver's compartment area. And the theory behind that is that, they can search anywhere that you could reach so that you could harm the officer. You're not allowed to search the back seat and the trunk and the glove box and beyond that.
Right. A buddy of mine thought that he was, somebody dropped a dime on him and accused him of being a drunk driver and said he's here, heading wherever it was. And it turned out to be, kind of a jilted special friend. Can officers pull you over based on third-hand information, or do they have to observe you?
They have to observe you. And those calls are quite frequently, especially in the suburbs, that you get a call of a suspected DUI driver weaving or blowing red lights. And if an officer actually spots that car, the description given by the caller, the Illinois law says the officer must follow that vehicle, and then you have to observe actions that you think that individual be intoxicated. You can't solely base the traffic stop on the anonymous caller, or even if the caller leaves his or her name, you have to develop probable cause on your own.
I'm not trying to make this segment into a how to get out of a DUI charge, because it's serious. Is this true that 1 out of every 10 drivers passing you on a Friday or Saturday night between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. in Chicago is legally intoxicated, we think?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are numbers put out by the MAD National Organization, and I would tell you that that's absolutely true. At least they're legally intoxicated on Friday and Saturday nights between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. That's a good standard, and it has a lot of data behind it. And, and I don't want to be somebody trying to get people out of DUIs either, but on all the information you and I are discussing today is the rights that you have as an Illinois citizen. They're public information. So, we're only sharing with your listeners what is already publicly available.
Well, when I read your piece, I understood most of this, obviously. And, of course, number one thing is, this is great advice. I was taught this when I was 16 years old. If you're ever pulled over, my cousin was the sheriff, you turn your interior dome lights on. Everybody in the car, put your hands up, either on the dashboard or the back of the front seat, and be polite. Yes, no, yes, sir, no, ma'am. Just be polite and let the system work its way, positively or negatively, we'll see. But don't argue with the police. They're just doing their job, and hopefully it'll all work out to the best of everybody, not only you but society. But I've learned some new things in this piece that I saw at Shaw Local as well. I didn't realize that I could say no to a search of my vehicle after being pulled over. I should have. I didn't.
No, yeah. So for those DUIs, if they saw an open beer can in your lap, or you had a bottle of whiskey there, that'd be different. But just have an officer say, may I search your car? You can say yes, but if you say no, they have to have more probable cause than just, I'm going to search it anyways. That would be an illegal search.
Do you think
there isn't a court in Illinois that would uphold that?
Do you think the body cams, and it's been a difficult transition, but do you think that they're going to be a net gain or a net loss for law enforcement?
A net gain. They're already a net gain. It's already happening. In fact, officers that I know that were reluctant for the squad car cameras, it always helped them. And now the body cameras, they actually love them. It actually shows what's going on. In most cases, it shows that the officers are doing their job or refutes actual information that's brought into the station that the officer wasn't acting properly.
Yeah, there's so many false complaints made against cops that my hope is that after this transition period and everybody learns how to live with always being on the cameras, that I think it'll be exculpatory evidence in favor of police who are wrongfully accused of bad behavior.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The only problem is that police officers would like anybody that actually files a false complaint against the officer should be held accountable like officers are held accountable.
Yes. Yeah.
And the state's attorney's office in Cook County is very reluctant to prosecute individuals that actually outright lie and make formal complaints against police officers. It's very rare that you'll see them prosecuted for that.
Absolutely, they should be held. Absolutely should be punished for a false accusation against a police officer. Knowingly false. Yeah.
Both ways. If officers are wrong, they should be prosecuted, but so should somebody that actually files an actual complaint against an officer and it's found to be false, completely false, they should be held accountable.
Absolutely. Yeah, they should have a little quiet time. Retired Police Chief Riverside, Tom Weitzel, thank you very much. You can follow Tom on, it's not Twitter anymore, Tom, it's X, at Chief Weitzel, at Chief Weitzel. Thank you, sir. Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you.
Take care.
John Howell, Essential Cuts. Check back every weekday for another episode of John Howell, Essential Cuts on 890 WLS.